Hi students, welcome to this lecture on the elements of design. There are quite a few elements that we have to get through, so I'll get right into it. Here are the learning objectives for this lecture. Basically, we're going to go over all the key elements of design that are going to be covered for this part of the unit. So line and within line, we'll talk about outline as well as implied line and psychic line. Within shape, which is another element, we'll talk about geometric and organic shapes. Space is another element of design. We'll talk about both positive and negative space. Perspective, we'll look at linear perspective as well as atmospheric perspective. Texture, we'll talk about both actual texture and simulated texture. And color. There's a lot going on with color with the readings, but the three I'm going to focus on are complementary colors, monochromatic colors, and then analogous colors. And then lastly, we'll look at time and motion as an element of design. So we'll start with line. Lines are everywhere, and if we were in class together, I would, ask you to look around and see, do you see any lines around you right now? This is a fundamental element in nature. It really makes up everything around us. It possesses the qualities of direction, division, thickness, patterns of movement. Water flows in lines, right? Rivers make up lines on the landscape. Lines are also, they define the limits of land. So we can think about borders in this way. The Rio Grande actually is, as a river, as we just spoke about, is also a border. It's a line between the United States and Mexico, etc. And then the power is also inherent in lines. And we'll talk about this throughout the semester as we talk about different cultures and the way that they use line. Oftentimes, line can be orderly or it can be chaotic. And so oftentimes we see lines denoting power in certain ways as well. So I'm looking around my little office here and I see lines everywhere, right? I have artwork behind me. There's circular lines that form circles. The closet has lines, right? There's lines that surround it and also go through it. So these types of things. If we were in class, I would feel, say I have a piece of hair here, right? This is a line too. So lines are everywhere. It's a great element of design. Within that, we have outline. So this is where artists depict the edge of a form with a solid line. Here you see a work by Yoshitomo Nara. This artist uses line in kind of a cartoonish fashion. So it's really that thick black outline that actually denotes the flatness, right? We know this is a representational image of a little girl, but it's also emphasized that it is not realistic. This is a flattened image, much like a cartoon. So if you think about outline, you can also think about any cartoon you've ever watched. SpongeBob, for instance, that's the one that comes up in the PowerPoint that's also posted this week. This artist here, this might be jarring for you. This artist is known for creating artworks that have to do with kind of the way that we think about youth and children and how we think of them as being blank slates, of being innocent, right? But this is flipping that on its head and saying, maybe childhood isn't so innocent, and maybe we are contributing to that with the ways in which that we, give children a lot of adult content right now, where they have access oftentimes to their parents' phones, a lot of television, right? A lot of violence that can come up in those different media as well. And a lot of these artists, like I'm not going to talk a lot about all the artists that come up in these examples. Of course, you can do this on your own, look up artists yourselves if you're more interested. But just to keep it going, I'm going to keep going through this rather quickly. So within line, there's also a couple other types of line. One is what we call implied line. This is a series of points that are connected by the viewer's eyes. So this means no continuous mark connects one point to another. For instance, here with the outline, we do have, lines that connect one point to the next, right? You can see the line there. Here you can actually see the line. It is just visually suggested. And within this, so this can happen in a number of ways. If we were together, I would ask you, okay, look at the piece here by Titian, the Assumption and Consecration of the Virgin. Where does your eye go? And you'd probably say, okay, well, it moves upward, right? And yes, that's what the artist wanted to happen. So we have three groups of people here. One is kind of the terrestrial realm, and just to give you a little bit more information about specifically about religious imagery, is often in religious imagery we also see division of characters or of the space into threes. And this is oftentimes because artists are trying to denote the Holy Trinity, specifically in Catholicism and Christianity, and thinking about the space as being divided into three to make us think about the Holy Trinity, right? So here you have the world of the terrestrial, and then you have clouds and angels, these little cherubs that divide this space from this kind of heavenly space, sacred space, where you see the Virgin here at center, and she looks up, and then you see this God figure with other angels at the top. So, but our eye moves from the base. And why does it move? Well, there aren't specific lines, right? These are implied lines. So line of sight is one of them. In the book, they talk about it as psychic line, or the direction in which the figures are looking, which served as an important compositional function to move our eyes. Okay, where are the figures in this painting looking? Oh, they're looking up. Okay, we better look up as well. Here's the Virgin, here's Mary. Oh, she also looks up, so we look up as well. Now, these are implied lines, specifically psychic line or line of sight. Another way that we see implied line is through connections, gestures. And so the figures at the base, they reach up, so we want to look up. Mary reaches up, we want to look up, right? So this is the way that these things work. And then here's a diagram to kind of help us think through it as well. Again, the division of the space into three, and then also, a triangular formation. We'll talk more about how artists use shapes in their work as well, implied shapes, not, that you can actually see the lines of these shapes, but how implied lines force us to look up and then up again. So you see this often not only through gesture, but also through line of sight or that psychic line. So here again, this is the image from your book, so I wanted to bring it in too. It doesn't have to be figural, like it doesn't have to be gestures or sight, but it can also be, here you see through the use of negative and positive space, you see that these there are lines that are connected here even though nothing really exists. So it's just empty space, but you can see that the lines of a square are formed, the lines of kind of a triangle are formed on the sides, and so forth. And then a circle itself, even though parts of these lines are missing. Now, if you look here, I would ask you this if we were in class, where do you look, right? You probably are looking to the center, probably to the Christ at the center. This is the Three Crosses by Rembrandt from 1653. Why are you looking that way? Well, the most important figure is at center, so you probably are drawn to him. However, you're also using line of sight. A lot of the people look to the center if you're looking around. Also, there's use there. This is black and white, but you can see that the artist has made it so that we have light coming in at the center. You can follow those lines of light that come down, and they bring us right to the center, but also to the other two figures around the edges. So this is implied line. But also the artist has used line to make implied line as well through cross-hatching and so forth. Shape, the second element that we have. Shape is an area of two-dimensional space. A shape has two dimensions, length and width. Nothing new to you guys. Something that is covered in the readings, geometric shapes, and then organic. So geometric shapes, like the ones you see here, these are shapes with mathematically regular contours, all your regular shapes that you see. Organic shapes are irregular, asymmetrical often, and oftentimes found in nature. So here's an example of some of them here. As I said before, with the work by Titian, here you see some shapes that are implied. That also happens, especially for a lot of Renaissance artists as well. It's a way for artists to create stability and harmony within the composition. So here shapes can be implied. Here's the actual painting, and then of course we've drawn over not one but two triangles that actually bring the composition together. Notice the Virgin, her foot peeks out of the side here. Now the artist didn't have to do that, but it completes the triangular formation. So it's implied that a triangular formation will actually create kind of this kind of stability and harmony within the composition. So that's why the artist does that here. Space, another element of design. Space in art refers to the area around, between, and within shapes and forms. Art can have both positive and negative space. So here, if you were looking at this work by Ellsworth Kelly, and this one will come up again in the class, you might think of the shapes here as being positive space. They are drawn to the foreground, and then the white wall on which they are is the negative space. And what do you see here? Take a moment. It will come to you right away. You either see a vase, right? If you're looking at the black, or if you're actually focusing on the white, you'll see two profiles. So this is the Rubin vase, and it's kind of fun because it gets us to think about the play between negative and positive. So negative can be positive in this instance, and positive can be negative. If you saw the vase first, the black, then you'd say that the black is the positive because that is what comes to the foreground, and the negative is the white. If you saw the two profiles, you'd think the opposite. You'd think, okay, the profiles are the positive, and the black in between them, right, the space in between that is in the background is the black. So again, it just gets us thinking about this as kind of nuanced. And it gets us also to thinking about two other terms, figure and ground. So in two-dimensional art, the positive space is thought of as the figure, while the negative space is thought of as the ground. And of course, this gets us thinking about modern sculptures and how they use this as well. So it's not just a two-dimensional space that we see positive and negative come out. We also see it in sculptures, especially modern sculptures who are working around the turn of the century and into the 1950s. Here you have a work by Barbara Hepworth. And so here you have the positive space would be occupied by the volume of the object, and then the negative space would be the empty space within the object. So the holes that you see here that lead us to the background. So this also gets us to a couple other terms, figure-ground relation. So the relationship between the figure and the ground, right? The figure being the positive space and the ground being the negative space. And then here you have a really fun work by M.C. Escher. You might have seen this artist in your life at some point. He's kind of a pop culture figure. And here he plays a lot with figure-ground reversal. So in this side of the painting, the black ducks, birds that you see flying, those are positive, right? That's the positive, and then all the white surrounding them is the negative space. Well, if you move to this side of the painting, those negative spaces become the positive space, right? Those ground spaces become the figure. So he's reversing the figure-ground relationship and making it so that halfway through the painting, as you look across the painting, you're seeing that the white space actually turns into positive space as it becomes the birds flying this way, and the black space, the birds, becomes the negative space then in between the white birds to this side of the painting. Another element of design we're going to cover is perspective. So this is a system that allows a picture plane, the flat surface of a canvas, to function as a convincing window through which a specific scene is presented to the viewer. So basically, artists want you to, at least at this point in history, before we have photography, which will get us talking a little bit more about this in coming lectures, but before photography, basically, there was no way for people to actually capture the world in a realistic fashion, except by painting it, drawing it, right? So artists wanted people to believe as close as possible that their paintings and their drawings looked exactly like a window into the real world. And so the best way to do this to make it seem most realistic is to use a system we call perspective. And there's a couple different types of perspective. 1-point linear perspective is the one that we're going to focus on in this class. There's also 2- and 3-point perspectives, which come up, I think, in your book as well. These are lines that are drawn on the picture plane in such a way as to represent parallel lines receding to a single point in the background. This is the horizon line or a vanishing point. So here's a couple graphs that might be used, not graphs, a couple images that might be useful. So here you'd actually find parallel lines that recede into the background. Here, if you had a road with buildings, you might imagine these lines go into the background and they converge at even the top of the building as a line that converges at a single vanishing point or horizon line. These lines are called orthogonals. That one does come up in your text as well. It's an important keyword. So in linear perspective and drawing and painting, orthogonal lines are these diagonal lines that help us and draw our eye into the background, okay? And they also converge at a vanishing point. And this is a way for us to know that 1-point linear perspective has been used correctly. This was invented by a Renaissance man, Filippo Brunelleschi. I have posted a video about this, so please be sure to check that out. There's a full video about his experiment. So he's the first one working, so basically he's working in the 1400s to think about how to best create realistic imagery. And so what he did is he lived in Florence, Italy. This is the birth of the Renaissance. He created a painting of the baptistry. As you see here, this is an important building at the center, right in front of the Duomo in Florence. So he created a painting of the Duomo, of the baptistry in front of the Duomo. And then he took a mirror, he cut a hole in his painting, and then, held the mirror, looked through his painting at the mirror, and then so he could see his painting in the mirror, and then moved the painting so he could actually see the baptistry, and then would place the mirror back in front so he could see his painting versus reality, so that he could create this system that we now call 1-point linear perspective, where he actually was able to use this experiment to create his system using orthogonals to use lines in the landscape that draw the viewer's eye back to a converging vanishing point. And again, this is covered in a video that you will find in this unit's material as well. So artists start using this and they get really good at it. And one of those artists is Leonardo da Vinci in his Last Supper. This is a painting that's probably quite famous to many of you probably seen this. This is after the Brunelleschi invents 1-point linear perspective, and it's perfectly here. Now, can you find any orthogonals here? Any lines that might draw your eyes to the background? Well, there's a bunch up in the ceiling, right? The panels here all converge. And then also if you you can do an invisible line. You draw it at the top of the doorways here, and it converges right at one point. So this can help you to find those orthogonals, and they all go to the same exact place, so we know the artist has used the method of 1-point linear perspective correctly. So this room does look like a real space, because in reality that's how things actually do work. And it just so happens that that point actually it is on the horizon line behind Christ's head, but also it emerges at his head. We know he's the most important figure, obviously, in this painting. He's central, but he's also at the convergence of all these orthogonals, drawing our attention to him in really important ways, okay? And of course, you can see implied line used here as well. A lot of the figures look to the center, although not all of them. There's some gestures to the center, and we know Christ, of course, is at center, so he is the most important figure. Prior to linear perspective, artists tried to get perspective correctly, but they weren't quite right. So if you follow the orthogonals here, okay, there's some here, There's some here at the base. There's one here. Well, they just don't converge correctly, right? It's just not quite right. Artists were trying though, and this is what we call intuitive perspective. So artists thinking about this, understanding that some of the lines, some of the orthogonals should converge, but not quite getting it right, and not understanding that all of them should converge if we want perspective to be completely correct. And again, this is before Brunelleschi invented linear perspective, so you can see that it's not quite right at this point. Another type of perspective that we'll cover is atmospheric perspective. This is the use of color and focus to simulate the illusion of space. So again, artists really wanting to make sure things look like they do in the natural world. So using linear perspective, but also using something called atmospheric perspective. So as objects recede into the background, they become paler, hazier, and bluer in hue. Leonardo da Vinci is one of the artists who, obviously you saw his work with The Last Supper, but he also used aerial perspective in his work, and he used it in The Last Supper as well. So you can see the background behind Christ's head. These mountains are looking like a hazy blue. Well, they're not actually blue, right? But that is basically the use of atmospheric perspective. So what is atmospheric perspective and how does it work? Well, if you and I were to stand outside right now and look into the distance, things look hazy when they're far away, right? This is just the way it is. Prior to the invention of atmospheric perspective, artists were trying to paint and depict things in the far background as being super detailed. We know our eyes don't have that capacity in real life. Because there's lots of layers of atmosphere, right? There's lots of space in between myself and a mountain far away. And that atmosphere creates a hazy bluish color. And that's just the way things work in reality. So here you see and they're going to be not only hazier and bluer, but probably paler and probably not, we can't see them very well, right? They're going to be blurry. So, that's what we have Leonardo doing here. So you can see that there are three groupings of rocks, which help us to think about this. Well, the rocks in the foreground are brown, they're normal, they're very detailed. And then we also have, rocks here in the foreground, and then we also have rocks in the middle ground. Those are still brownish, but becoming hazier, right? They're less detailed. And then we have a third grouping of rocks in the way background, and they're bluish in tone, right? And they're not very detailed, they're very hazy. So we can tell these ones are in the foreground, middle ground, and the background. And this is where we have the use of atmospheric perspective. Artists even more in near the present have used this over time. So here we have Turner using it in the 1800s. Turner has used it to the extent where you actually can't even see a horizon line. You still have orthogonals. You do have linear perspective used here as well. So these lines do converge, and there's actually a bridge over here as well. And this orthogonal converges right here as well, but it's so hazy, we can't even see it anymore. So here you have both linear perspective and atmospheric perspective used wonderfully. Okay, now let's move on to texture. Two types of texture that are going to be covered in the elements of design are actual and simulated. Actual texture, just like you might think, this is real texture. It's created, it's not just represented. So here you have Merritt Oppenheim object from the 1930s. The artist has basically covered this whole, like a plate, a spoon, and a cup in fur, and the fur does have a real texture. This is a sculpture that you can go and see, and it actually, if you could touch it, which of course you can't, you're not supposed to touch art usually, but we'll see how that changes over time. If you were to touch this, it would have a texture, right? It would actually be furry, coarse, all that kind of stuff. So this is actual texture versus simulated texture. So this is visual representation or the illusion of a tactile surface. So you see that here. It's just represented. So here's a print, I think it's a lithography print by Dürer of a young hare, a young rabbit. And so if you look closely, the hair of the the hair of the hair, the fur of the hair. It looks like it's very textured. It looks soft, but also coarse. And then even the eyes, they seem like they would be a kind of glossy, smooth texture. Well, this is realistic, right? But if you actually touched the drawing, if you actually touched the print, it would be flat, right? This is a simulated texture. It looks, there's the illusion of a tactile surface, but it actually would be smooth. So that's simulated texture. Color. We're going to talk about 3 different types of color. So basic color vocab. Sir Isaac Newton discovered that light breaks into a spectrum, bands of color, and he recognized this as in a circle formation as the conventional color wheel. You've all heard of it. You know about it. You probably already know that the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. From these, you know, all other colors can be made. And so you see them here, and then you have a variety of colors in between them. So let's look at those colors. We have secondary colors. These are orange, green, and violet, and are mixtures of 2 surrounding primary colors. You also have intermediate colors. This is a mix of a primary color and a nearby secondary color. In this system, mixing all the colors makes black. A couple color schemes. Now these become important for our terms, for our key elements. Analogous color. These are color schemes that are composed of neighboring hues on the color wheel. For instance, an analogous color would be red, red, orange, and orange, right? Analogous colors for green would be green and yellow green or blue green. So colors next to one another. These, if artists use these colors, analogous colors together, oftentimes on the basis of color, we have what we call a color temperature. And so oftentimes if you're talking about or writing about art, you can talk about a color being warm or cool, right? Color schemes being warm or cool. Here you have a color scheme that is pretty warm, right? So we have analogous colors like orange, yellow, red, and of course there's some greens mixed in there as well. These are basically fall colors and browns. So this is kind of a warm color palette. This art, we'll talk about this artist just a little bit, Jane Hammond. This is called Fallen. It's so this is a work that was ongoing 2004 through 2011. Each leaf is inscribed with the name of a soldier killed in the Iraq War. This is a testament to tragedy and healing. So basically she started with 1,511 leaves in 2004, and in 2011 she finished the work. She could have gone on. But she ended the work with 4,455. And so if you have a loved one who's fallen, and each one of these is actually a paper leaf that she made. So it's an inkjet print on paper. And then she, of course, made it, painted it, all that kind of stuff as well. Each specifically, and you could go and find your loved one's name on one of these leaves. So artists thinking about contemporary events and thinking about kind of social justice and taking an activist kind of point on there. Another important key term, complementary colors. Complementary colors are color schemes that are opposite of one another on the color wheel. So for instance, yellow and purple are primary, blue and orange are primary, green and red are primary. Can you think about colors are complementary? Can you think about complementary colors that are important, that you see often, that are used together? Green and red, Christmas colors, right? Whether or not you practice or celebrate Christmas, these are colors you see a lot together during the holiday season because they go well together. Complementary colors make each other pop, so they look better together. Yellow and purple, I'm from Minnesota. Minnesota Vikings, right? You can think of a lot of color, complementary colors used in football uniforms because they just look good together. Orange and blue, I believe the Broncos are orange and blue, or other teams, I don't know. So thinking about these things, complementary colors oftentimes look really good together, so you see them oftentimes out in the world together. Now I do want us to try this little exercise. This is an artist, Jasper Johns, who was working with the flag often in the 1950s and 60s. This is a painting of a flag. What I want you to do before I talk more about it is to look at this little white circle in the middle. I want you to come close to the screen and stare at the circle. Don't take your eyes off it. Stare at it. Stare at it. Keep staring at it. All right, now keep staring as I switch the screen. And what did you see? Yeah, you probably saw the after image. So now you'll see that it's just a white screen. There's nothing there. But the after image, the image that was retained in your retina, is the complementary colors. So the after image that you get when you're looking at something is going to be the complementary color of the picture of the what you're actually seeing in front of you. So this is a very interesting thing that has to do with the science of your eyes. And Jasper Johns realized that and I thought that was pretty cool. So he's playing with complementary colors here, giving you this flag, which is all the complementary colors of the real flag. So the complementary color of white is black. The complementary color of orange is blue, and then the complementary color of green is red. And so when you look at this and you really observe it closely, the opposites will come to the fore because it's retained in your retina for a little bit. So pretty cool. Complementary colors can also be placed side by side to create a sense of tension, sometimes because they look good together, but they also kind of can be tense. So here's an artist, Georges Seurat, who did a technique called pointillism. We'll talk more about him later in the class as well, where he actually used little points of color, tiny ones, and then if you zoom out, you actually see that they make up different colors. Monochromatic, these are works that feature a single color or have a closed or restricted palette, so different shades of red, for instance, as you see here, different hues, you add more white, and then you get light pink. So these are monochromatic. Mark Rothko is an artist, a minimalist artist who uses a lot of monochromatic colors in his paintings. So here you see a painting in shades of orange, yellow, right, monochromatic. And if you want to go visit a cool place to check out his works, actually in Houston, he opened up the Rothko Chapel in 1971, and here's what it looks like on the outside. You go in and you basically just have all of his artworks in there. Like I said, they're very minimalist. Some are just one color. But they're supposed to be very meditative. He found them very meditative, and it was a spiritual practice for him to paint them. So it's an open space to all. It can be sacred. It can inspire you. You can go and do whatever you want in there. It's pretty cool if you're ever in that area. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is time and motion in art. And this is just the use of change over time as an element of an art design. So for instance, we have Alexander Calder. These are mobile sculptures, so basically they move over time. You can't really see it in these pictures, but these are the same artwork seen from different angles as the artwork is moving, okay? So it looks different, right? You can see this one is dangling, they're both dangling from the ceiling, so the air circulates around them and moves them. So this is called kinetic sculpture. It's another key term. The artist was interested in dance, performance, and choreography, so he understood that his artwork didn't have to be static. They could always change and move, just like a dancer in a performance might move. We can also talk about movement is a term of narrative, kinds in terms of narrative motion. So here you see an artwork, and we'll talk about this one later in the artist in the class as well. This is David by Bernini. This is from the famous biblical story of David and Goliath, right before David is about to throw a stone to kill the giant. And you can see here that he looks like he's about to throw. And so narrative movement is understood to be a part of this piece. So even though it doesn't move physically like Calder's works, it actually seems like it's about to move. There's a kind of an energetic movement that's implied versus this other image of David from the same story by a different artist where it's very static. David's not about to move. He doesn't look like he's about to throw a stone versus Bernini's dynamic movement that makes it look like it's about to move. You can also have the illusion of movement. So this is a movement called op art or optical painting, where artists actually use the physical characteristics of formal elements and manipulate them to stimulate our nervous system into thinking it perceives movements. So these are just squares, rectangles that become smaller, right? But it looks like the image is moving. Here's another one also by Bridget Riley, Blaze 4 from the 60s. And it's not moving, but I bet you don't like to look at it too long because you're starting to feel weird and it seems like things are moving towards the center. Well, no, it's just lines that have been formulated in such a pattern as to make us think that we're seeing something moving. This is called optical art. And the last thing we're going to look at today is change over time. And so for this, I like to talk about Felix Gonzalez Torres, one of my very favorite artists, with this work here. And so this work changes over time. Yes, it is actually a pile of candy in the corner of a gallery, but it's also called Untitled Portrait of Ross in LA. It's from the 90s, and this is at the height of the AIDS epidemic. Felix Gonzalez Torres was an artist who had AIDS, a gay artist who had AIDS and actually died from AIDS. His partner at the time, Ross, this is a portrait of Ross, died of AIDS as well, but died before Gonzalez Torres. And so he created this artwork. And so it is literally just a pile of candy in the corner. But the reason why it has to do with temporality and time and change is because you're actually supposed to take one. And so if you were a gallery goer and you went into the gallery, you saw this piece, you would be asked to take one. That's part of it. And so over time it changes, right? It gets smaller, people take candy and the pile gets smaller and smaller. And then at the end of the day, the gallery replenishes the pile so that it can be open to people the next day. So what is actually happening? Well, the pile's getting smaller. So it depends on what time you're seeing it throughout the day, the artwork will change over time. And then of course, the other part of this too is that it's also gets us thinking about the virus, AIDS, the virus, which eats away at your body, right, from the inside. And so this pile of candy is it's supposed to start the day at 175 pounds. Now, this is how much weight Ross, Felix Gonzalez Torres, his partner, weighed when he was healthy. Now, over time, his weight went down. As we know, AIDS kind of eats away at you and you get really skinny. And so the pile gets skinnier and skinnier and loses weight throughout the day, which mimics the way in which AIDS ate away at his partner Ross's body before Ross passed away. So it kind of seems like a fun and beautiful piece. And then actually we have the artist using kind of the second layer of meaning behind the pieces of candy. And of course, as you eat them, it's a hard candy. And you suck on it and it slowly dissolves. So all of this kind of embedded in this work, and you are taking part in it. So you're taking part in the dwindling away of kind of this portrait, which represents the body of his beloved. So that's change over time. And that is kind of all I want to go over today. I'm sorry this was such a long lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you soon.